Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're doing something really intensely personal.
We are.
We're not just exploring the facts of addiction, we are diving into the psychological warfare it wages on the family, specifically on the people fighting hardest to, save the addict.
Right. And our source material for this is a brutally honest first-person account from a mother named Glennis.
Her life went from what she called the American dream to just absolute chaos, almost overnight.
And it all centered around her son Jacob's addiction to crystal meth.
I think it's important to frame this right away. Addiction is a disease that fundamentally messes with your mind.
Oh, absolutely. And Glennis's story is a textbook illustration of how that mental destabilization, it extends far beyond the user.
Hmm.
For Glennis, her mind was pulled in this constant conflict.
Hmm.
Should I rescue him or should I let him face the brutal consequences?
Where does compassion end and enabling begin?
Exactly that question. It's the central dilemma.
And you'll notice as we unpack this that the way Glennis tells her story is crucial. It's not neat and linear.
No.
She jumps backward and forward through time, and that really captures the spiraling, non-linear experience of being an addict's loved one.
It really does. It mirrors that feeling of, constant false starts, the recurring hope, and then the inevitable dead ends. Her life became a ping-pong ball, batted between crisis and denial.
So our mission today is to extract the painful, difficult nuggets of wisdom embedded in this raw account.
We're going to meticulously uncover the cost of codependency, analyze the immense complexity of setting hard boundaries with a loved one who is actively spiraling.
And trace Glennis's unexpected path toward reclaiming her own identity. I mean, she had to navigate a profound marital breakdown, judgment from her entire community.
And even her own daughter's uncompromising tough love, just to find the ground beneath her own feet.
This dive is about the collateral damage, the emotional arithmetic the family has to perform, and the realization that often the parent's recovery has to come before the child's. So let's unpack this. So Glennis starts her story by painting this very specific picture of her former life. This wasn't just success. This was like the definition of the American suburban ideal, the one you read about in magazines.
Oh, it was meticulously constructed. We're talking about a home situated high on a hill, which already gives you that physical distance from the rest of the town.
A deliberate separation.
Right, suggesting superiority or at least, insulation from common problems. It included all the status symbols, the Range Rover for the family, the Porsche for her husband, Geoffrey.
The in-ground pool, a packed social calendar.
Exactly. Glennis truly believed, and she wanted everyone else to believe, that they were living out the American dream.
And the family inside this bubble was presented as equally flawless. You have Geoffrey, the senior law partner, this anchor of the community.
Then there's Sarah, the daughter, who's the valedictorian, destined for success with a stack of impressive scholarships.
And Jacob, the handsome, athletic son who excelled in everything. Basketball, soccer, baseball. He was the golden boy.
The irony is it's profound. Glennis describes a life lived on a thin surface. She was working overtime to maintain that polish, but deep down she acknowledged she was skating on it.
And the moment that surface fractured, the whole illusion just vanished in an instant. It proves how much energy it takes to maintain that kind of control when, in her words, you're not looking.
That denial, that avoidance of looking, is really where the cracks started appearing with Jacob. The sources suggest the trouble started subtly, well before the addiction fully took hold.
Right, it wasn't a sudden explosion.
No, not at all. Initially, his academic struggles were conveniently dismissed as a lack of motivation. Couldn't be a real deficit because, the family was perfect.
Of course.
Then came the retreat. He quits all his organized sports to focus on the guitar. Glennis just interprets this as artistic rebellion, not withdrawal.
And by his senior year, he's attending an alternative school.
Which Glennis justified to herself and everyone else as offering a better, more flexible curriculum.
But that flexibility came at a price, didn't it? The town gossip? This detail really pulls you into the pressure she was under.
Oh, yeah. She recalls the agony of running into people like Margie Smith at the grocery store.
And that's key to understanding the fuel behind the facade. Glennis knew Margie Smith and others were judging her son, and by extension, her parenting.
So her denial just intensified.
Right.
It had to. She was terrified of having the community confirm the failure she was feeling internally.
She had to pretend the alternative school was this proactive, enlightened choice, not a desperate measure, just to mitigate that social humiliation.
And the ultimate impossible display of normality came when Jacob skipped his own high school graduation ceremony. Just didn't show up.
He claimed he wanted to celebrate on his own.
And even then, Glennis tried to spin it. that Jacob was just being unique, marching to his own beat.
But denial can only last so long. That uncertainty finally exploded with the first real public incident.
His arrest, he was picked up for underage drinking and possession of, I think it was less than an ounce of marijuana.
So not a meth bust yet,
Right.
but it was the catastrophic failure of the perfect son in a very public way.
Yeah.
And Glennis's immediate panicked reaction established the pattern that would come to dominate her life. She became the rescuer.
She was the one who went straight to the ATM in the middle of the night, waiting in the wee hours to bail him out.
And this is where we really need to pause and define that critical difference between compassion and enabling.
Yes.
Because her reaction and Geoffrey's reaction are night and day.
Right. So compassion addresses the person's suffering. Enabling addresses the consequences of their behavior. Glennis's immediate bailout was a textbook example of enabling.
She was so desperate to protect him from the immediate, uncomfortable legal consequences the suffering Jacob had brought on himself, that she just undermined the natural learning process.
And Geoffrey saw it instantly. This is what led to that irreversible marital rift. He was, in her words, furious.
He accused her of being a real enabler. But Glennis defends herself not based on logic, but on this raw maternal instinct.
She says, "Enabler, please, I'm his mother. What am I supposed to do?"
And it's painful because they're both right, and they're both fundamentally flawed in their approach.
Exactly. Geoffrey is right that Glennis enabled the behavior by removing the consequences. But his fury, it's rooted in shame, not in genuine concern for Jacob's health. He wanted the problem to disappear because it threatened his status.
While Glennis defaults to this primal role of protector, feeling like she's caught between being a codependent, an enabler, or just plain fool.
And Geoffrey uses that enabling as the catalyst to end the marriage. He accuses Glennis of having taken his side.
Which highlights how the family wasn't united against the addiction, it was divided by the addiction.
Precisely. For Geoffrey, the failure of the family structure, the loss of that perfect image, was a greater catastrophe than Jacob's actual welfare. And Glennis's choice of rescue confirmed to Geoffrey that she valued Jacob's immediate comfort over maintaining the family's flawless, status-driven structure.
That confrontation was truly the beginning of the end. That initial fracture became a full-blown rupture when Geoffrey finally just lost control. Glennis describes this explosive fight where she tried to intervene, yelling that she would call 911. Geoffrey shoved Jacob hard,
resulting in a bleeding nose and Geoffrey just screaming the final decree, "You are no longer welcome in this house."
The physical violence sets the tone, but it's Jacob's response that gives us the essential psychological context for Geoffrey's entire character.
Yeah, this is a crucial piece of the puzzle. Jacob fires back with this devastating accusation that hits Geoffrey right where he lives.
He says, "Dad hates me, Can't you see I'm an embarrassment to him, just like Grandma was?"
That reference to Grandma Jeanette is shocking, and it really requires a deeper look because it connects Jacob's addiction to this hidden intergenerational wound in the family.
So what's the story there?
Well, Glennis admits that Geoffrey had always been obsessively secretive about his mother, Jeanette. She had suffered from mental problems and was institutionalized early in Geoffrey's life.
And Geoffrey was raised by his wealthy, educated grandparents,
who consciously eradicated all memory of his unbalanced mother. They made sure Geoffrey grew up having the best of the best, erasing that part of his history.
So the need for perfection wasn't just about status. It was a deeply ingrained defense mechanism against the shame of Jeanette.
Exactly. Geoffrey had spent his entire life successfully performing the role of the perfect, high-achieving lawyer to prove that the family flaw, that genetic taint, had been extinguished.
And Jacob, through his drug use, his failures, his increasingly chaotic behavior, became the living embodiment of the very thing Geoffrey had worked so hard to bury.
So Jacob's perception that he was basically replicating his grandmother's role as the family embarrassment was this bitter, incredibly insightful read on his father's deepest, most toxic fear. It gave Jacob this perverse sense of a shared destiny with Jeanette, and it just fueled Geoffrey's disproportionate rage.
After that fight, Glennis finally left Geoffrey. She traded that spacious home on the hill for a vastly different reality.
And the sources capture this shift with such painful, visceral detail. The contrast is essential for you to grasp the magnitude of her physical and emotional fall.
She leased a shabby 2-bedroom apartment that was, about an eighth the size of her old home?
Right. It smelled faintly of pets she didn't own. She traded the heated leather seats of the Range Rover for a decrepit Ford Taurus that trailed a cloud of black smoke everywhere she went.
And the gourmet coffee.
Gone. She was left with a generic brand and a tin can that she says smells vaguely like tuna fish.
Those sensory details, the tuna coffee, the pet smell, they just drive home the point that her life, once so controlled and curated, was now messy and chaotic.
And she realized that the luxuries she lost were things she just took for granted. And now she was forced to actually grieve the life she thought she had.
Her emotional state was mirrored in that squalor. She felt filleted with a dull and rusty knife, struggling just to remember how to breathe.
This is when she started therapy with Dr. Abrams, who noted she needed to stop trying to fix everyone else and start facing her own, as he called it, acknowledged loss.
She was trying to avoid the pain, even questioning, was this how people ended up in mental hospitals?
Which is an ironically tragic fear given Jeanette's fate.
And as she's grappling with the loss of her marriage, she discovers the betrayal that confirmed the whole facade was completely hollow.
She returns to the big house, supposedly to check on the neglected pets, Winnie the cat and Rufus the dog, who were thankfully being looked after by a neighbor, Mrs. Fieldstone.
And it was in Geoffrey's meticulously organized study, the one perfect place left in the house, that she found an envelope in his desk drawer.
The photos from Geoffrey's 50th birthday, showing him looking so happy with the city manager, Judith Ramsey.
At first, she tried to dismiss the clear intimacy, but that seed of doubt was planted.
The confirmation came later. Glennis drove back to the house, still clinging to this little thread of hope that she could apologize, that maybe she could save the marriage.
Instead, she found him at Sandali's, their local upscale spot, dining intimately with Judith Ramsey.
And the damning detail wasn't just the woman, it was the context. A full bottle of wine on the table.
Right, because the Harmons were notorious non-drinkers.
Exactly. So the wine becomes this symbol of Geoffrey's new, unrestrained post-marriage identity. His easy smile and sparkling eyes cemented the fact that this wasn't some sudden mistake. This was a calculated replacement.
Glennis's reaction after that shows how completely trauma had just devolved her ability to respond rationally.
She couldn't confront Geoffrey, so she sought this immediate, immature revenge against the symbol of his betrayal.
She went back to the restaurant parking lot and keyed Judith Ramsey's bright red car.
Running her key along the length of the shiny red paint, digging a nice deep gouge of rage. It was a physical expression of the emotional damage she felt. Momentarily satisfying,
But ultimately pointless.
yeah.
But the truly symbolic act was waiting back at her tiny, tuna-smelling apartment, the smashing of the Waterford crystal anniversary vase.
Yes, that vase was a souvenir from their perfect 25th anniversary. It symbolized the entire illusion of the life she had sacrificed everything to protect.
And she just threw it out the window.
Watched it shatter into thousands of shining pieces of sparkling crystal splayed across the sidewalk. She later gathered those pieces in a wooden salad bowl and kept them on her coffee table.
A permanent, physical, jagged reminder of what her marriage had devolved into, just broken shards of a flawless appearance.
The facade was finally, irreversibly destroyed.
So as Glennis is navigating this new, shattered reality, she tries to find support, but her own pride and her codependent habits, they just actively sabotaged her initial attempts.
Oh, completely. She was still operating from a place of superiority and denial. She went to Al-Anon alone after Geoffrey flatly refused to participate.
Arguing Jacob had to help himself.
Right. Glennis sat on that uncomfortable metal folding chair and immediately began judging the people around her.
She looked at the other attendees, dealing with their own chaos, and concluded they were losers, exactly what Geoffrey would have thought.
And when it was her turn to share, she froze. She was terrified of revealing the truth about her perfect family's downfall.
So she left early, determined not to spill my sorrows, only to find Jacob home, acting deceptively normal, eating ice cream.
And this failure is so crucial because it shows how pervasive her need for the facade remained, even after the divorce. She could not accept that her problem was equivalent to the problems of those losers.
That denial just reinforced her codependency, that excessive focus on others' problems to the detriment of her own.
Right, because if she wasn't like them, she must still be in control.
But the pressure of managing Jacob and the divorce finally forced her into therapy with Dr. Abrams. This is where she started to acknowledge what codependency actually looked like in her daily life.
Dr. Abrams made her commit to acknowledging what she had lost. And this is also where she formulated her most difficult yet necessary rule for self-preservation.
Which was never trust an addict. Let's delve into that rule, because for a mother, that sounds incredibly harsh. How did she reconcile that with her maternal instinct?
She links it directly to the drug itself.
Yeah.
Jacob wasn't inherently malicious. He was fundamentally compromised by his addiction to crystal meth.
And we have to remember, crystal meth in particular is known for inducing paranoia, rapid mood swings, and this deeply entrenched psychological dependency that makes the user incapable of consistent truthfulness.
Right. The drug itself, she realized, was a liar. It promised euphoria and functioning, but it only delivered destruction. Therefore, trusting Jacob meant trusting the voice of the addiction, which was deceitful by nature.
So for her own sanity, and to stop enabling, she had to treat every promise, every excuse, with skepticism.
The rule wasn't about hate. It was about acknowledging the functional reality of the disease.
And she slowly began to build a support network outside her old circle. First, there was Sherry, her longtime, impeccably dressed friend.
Sherry provided good basic advice. You can't force them to get help, but you can get help for yourself. She represented the familiar world.
But Glennis could only confide partially. She was still unable to admit the full severity, the meth, the syringes to her friend, because the shame was still just too powerful.
The real unconditional support came from her new, smaller community in the apartment building. The first was a man named Jack Smart.
Jack is introduced in the shared laundry room, doing these silent, unassuming acts of service.
He's a sober alcoholic who got clean on a very specific, memorable date, January 17, 1977.
That specificity just conveys his profound authority. He's been there.
And he's unpretentious and firm. He tells Glennis, either you're in recovery or you're not. Simple as that.
He didn't lecture, he acted. He folded her laundry meticulously, even noticed when she was short on quarters, and just covered the cost-silent, genuine help without any expectation.
He offered Jacob a connection to AA, emphasizing that this wasn't about Glennis fixing him, but about Jacob talking to someone who had been down some pretty hard roads.
Later, she finds the professional support she needed in Marcus Palmer, the founder of a place called Hope's Wings.
And Marcus understood codependency immediately. He was one who directly addressed Glennis's overwhelming guilt.
He gave her a prescription to combat that guilt. He made it clear that Glennis was not responsible for Jacob's addiction. It was not her fault.
And he prescribed practical tools, memorizing a passage from Philippians, which emphasizes prayer without anxiety, and repeating the mantra, "It is not my fault that my son has a drug problem."
These were concrete, tangible tools designed to rewire her emotional core, which still believed deep down that she must have failed as a mother.
Marcus understood that rational acceptance, it's not my fault, is very different from emotional acceptance.
And while Glennis is trying to grapple with all this, she also has to deal with her daughter, Sarah, who represents the polar opposite extreme, this uncompromising, tough love.
Sarah is the voice of that judgmental, Geoffrey-like value system. She's the successful sibling who views addiction as a moral failing, not a disease.
She slams Glennis for letting Jacob ruin your marriage and is blunt to the point of cruelty, calling her brother a junkie.
And she advocates for complete disengagement. Let him do his thing and hope he doesn't kill himself doing it.
Which creates this fascinating spectrum of family response that is really critical for you to understand.
On one end, you have Glennis, who is dangerously over-involved, driven by guilt, and a desperate need to fix or control the outcome.
In the middle, you have Geoffrey, driven by shame and denial, who responds with exile and punishment.
And on the far end, you have Sarah, driven by self-preservation, who draws this hard, moralistic line to protect her own perfectly planned life, even if it means abandoning her sibling.
Sarah's stance is a common, often painful reflection of the successful sibling who internalizes the parent's value system, the idea that perfection must be protected.
She reinforces the toxic idea that Jacob chose this failure and therefore deserves the consequences, while Glennis believes she caused the failure and must fix the consequences. It's a tragedy of conflicting loyalties and misdirected energy.
After Geoffrey throws Jacob out, Glennis takes him in, which, continues that enabling pattern. Jacob finds this fragile, temporary stability, but he's constantly disappearing.
Right. And he lands a job washing dishes at a place called Mamma Mia's Pizza, thanks to an older friend, Daniel, who was around 30 and also kind of struggling with recovery or use.
Glennis's antennae were immediately up regarding Daniel.
Her fears were validated when Jacob lost his job for missing shifts. She drove out to Daniel's duplex dump, and the description of that place is critical for understanding the environment of Jacob's drug use.
It was pure squalor. The air hit her first. A sickly, sweet, nauseating mixture of rotten garbage, filthy laundry, and various human body odors.
It was the smell of decomposition, of decay, a clear indication that this was a drug house, an environment where no one cared about life or cleanliness.
And Glennis, the former Lady of the Hill, the neurotic neat freak, she was just shocked.
Jacob immediately deployed manipulation to defend the squalor. He called her a rich snob who couldn't understand good people, and then he used her own moral compass against her.
He threw the Christian acronym WWJD, what would Jesus do, back at her, asking if her version of Jesus went around judging and dissing people.
It was a classic manipulative move to make Glennis back off by inducing guilt and highlighting her perceived hypocrisy.
And it worked for a time. It reinforced her need to prove she wasn't judgmental.
But Glennis remained trapped in her codependent ritual. Despite Jacob's accusations, she continued to clean his room at the apartment, making his bed, doing his laundry.
She felt this was either helping his recovery or maybe it was penance for being a bad mom.
It was during this act of penance that she crossed the line into snooping and discovered the hard truth that shattered her denial about the severity of Jacob's addiction.
She began finding indicators, grimy spoons, which she realized were used for heating drugs, and a broken mirror piece.
But the undeniable, terrifying revelation was behind the toilet, concealed in a roll of tissue. There were at least a dozen used hypodermic syringes.
And this detail is pivotal. For Glennis, it wasn't just drugs, it was the ultimate violation of his body. The physical act she couldn't reconcile with the memory of her skin, who hated getting vaccinations as a kid.
Her initial denial was just frantic. She tried to cling to the idea that they were Daniel's, or that Jacob had just found them. When she first confronted him, Jacob lied skillfully, convincing her he would never reuse them.
But the reality of the needles forced Glennis to press him again later, and the truth finally broke through that crystal meth facade.
Jacob confessed. Meth. Crystal meth, as in the drug that people manufacture out of fertilizer and.
And crucially, he didn't apologize or express regret. He defended his use.
He called it his medical treatment, claiming it helped him cope with life better and function, stating that without it, he'd rather be dead.
That phrase, medical treatment, is terrifying. It shows the complete psychological capture by the drug meth had become his solution, his functional identity.
Glennis, completely panicked, called Dr. Abrams, just gasping for breath on the phone.
And Dr. Abrams, the professional voice of reason, was measured but firm. He reiterated the core rule of recovery. The only thing Glennis could do was encourage him to get help. It had to be Jacob's choice.
But then Dr. Abrams offered the professional boundary Glennis needed to hear, but just couldn't stomach. He said, you could tell him that he can't continue living with you unless he agrees to seek treatment.
And Glennis immediately shut this down, saying simply, I can't do that. She was paralyzed by the thought of putting her son, who was using IV meth, out on the street.
Her instinct to protect him from external consequences still outweighed the need to force internal change.
Seeking comfort, Glennis makes this final desperate move and calls her own mother, who provided zero practical help and only amplified the toxic, outdated family values.
Instead of offering support about the meth, Glennis's mother focused on the divorce, urging Glennis to forgive Geoffrey because men do stray sometimes.
And that her godly woman's role was to forgive and forget and restore the marriage.
It was completely tone-deaf to Glennis's current crisis and provided absolute proof that Glennis could not look to her past or her old structure for any kind of solution.
The accumulation of all this stress, the syringes, the lies, the unhelpful advice, the terror of his death, it all culminated in Glennis's moment of total surrender.
She collapsed onto the kitchen floor. Huddled in her flannel pajamas and bathrobe, unable to think or move, she finally made her first genuine break from codependency, though she didn't realize it yet.
She admitted utter powerlessness. I can't fix this, God. I don't know how. Please help me.
And this wasn't a manipulative prayer seeking control. It was an admission that her love, her money, and her maternal instinct were totally insufficient to solve the addiction. This surrender to a higher power, or at least to the reality that she could not control Jacob, was the first essential step in her own recovery.
True change for a family in crisis often requires an external shock that reframes the entire catastrophe. For Glennis, that shock came with the death of Matthew, her friend Sherry's son.
Yeah, and the sources describe this moment of profound darkness and honesty from Glennis.
When she first heard on the news that a young man had died of alcohol poisoning, her immediate subconscious reaction was one of ecstatic relief when the victim was identified as someone else's son.
That brief, terrible relief just reveals the absolute consuming level of fear she was living under. The terror that every single phone call would bring the worst news.
And that relief turned to horror when she learned the victim was Matthew, Sherry's son, who died after a 21-shot challenge on his 21st birthday.
Matthew, the one who was home from college, the one who was supposed to be safe and successful.
His tragedy was a brutal, unavoidable mirror. It forced Glennis to confront the razor-thin margins separating her family from devastation.
But critically, it acted as a catalyst that pulled Glennis out of her self-pity and depression. She realized she had to be strong for Sherry, pulling her friend back from the brink of despair.
In her own words, "It was time for me to be strong for Sherry."
This shift in focus is exactly what Dr. Abrams had been suggesting. Stop focusing only on Jacob and focus on her own recovery by helping someone else.
And we see this unusual yet powerful moment of connection at the funeral.
They find themselves sharing a cigarette break by the fire exit. Sherry confesses she took up smoking again after Matthew died, saying, "It's like I needed to do it."
And Glennis, the woman who had spent years maintaining the perfect image, pretended to smoke alongside her friend just to offer solidarity. She chose compassion and vulnerability over maintaining her polished facade.
The loss of Matthew allowed Glennis to step outside of her own isolated pain for the first time.
And Matthew's death also had a brief visible impact on Jacob. At the funeral, he was visibly emotional, and while crying, he whispered the words Glennis had been praying for.
"I'll go into rehab, I'll go."
Glennis, desperate and hopeful, immediately set up an appointment at Hope's Wings. But this brief moment of clarity just evaporated immediately.
Jacob missed the scheduled appointment, instantly reaffirming the harsh truth of her never trust an addict rule.
Glennis, profoundly discouraged, went to meet Marcus Palmer alone. She confessed her feelings of being a total failure.
And Marcus, recognizing her deep codependent roots, reinforced once more that she was not responsible for the addiction. But he also highlighted that she kept trying to fix him because of her natural codependent belief that her love and effort must be enough.
The disappointment came to a head on Thanksgiving. This is a scene that perfectly captures the addict's selfishness and the family member's delusional hope.
Glennis, holding on to the fantasy of a normal holiday, cooked a massive dinner for Jacob and his 5 band friends.
She was worried about fitting everyone into her tiny apartment.
And of course, no one showed up. She was duped by my son.
But this disastrous catering failure turned into an unexpected moment of grace and community.
Instead of eating alone, Glennis, on a total whim, invited her new neighbors, Jack Smart, Mrs. Gardner, and Cammie with their children. Marcus Palmer even joined them later.
This impromptu dinner was symbolic. Glennis was no longer defined by the expectations of the perfect life on the hill. She was finding genuine, unpretentious community right in her tiny apartment, surrounded by her new support network.
And Jacob's late arrival shattered that peace. He showed up twitchy, paranoid, clearly high, and immediately viewed the presence of Marcus Palmer as betrayal and intervention.
He slammed out, accusing Glennis of being a traitor for consorting with the enemy, the counselor from Hope's Wings.
This moment was the final psychological break. Jacob chose the addiction over the community and over his mother's attempt at normalcy. Glennis was emotionally drained.
But the final, definitive boundary was forced upon her shortly thereafter.
Geoffrey called, absolutely enraged. Jacob had broken into the big house, stealing, vandalizing, and leaving behind furious anguish notes blaming his father.
This was no longer just addiction. This was a criminal act.
Glennis finds Jacob exhausted and high and drives him in her decrepit Taurus. She was so emotionally exhausted and her old habits kicked in. She was on the verge of driving him back to her apartment, reversing the crisis and allowing him to stay just to keep him safe.
But she pauses before turning onto her street. This moment, the internal conflict during that prayer for direction, is the climax of her entire journey.
She remembers the strength Marcus and Dr. Abrams had tried to give her, and she drives past her apartment.
This is the crucial, monumental boundary shift. It wasn't driven by rage or emotion, but by professional advice and absolute desperation.
She finally leveraged the reality of his actions. She didn't plead for him to get help for her sake. She confronted him with the consequences of his actions, the threat of prison for breaking and entering.
And Jacob, shocked by the real legal consequence that Glennis was finally willing to enforce, tearfully agreed to inpatient treatment.
The enabling finally stopped.
The change was swift once that boundary was set. Marcus quickly secured a vacancy at Hope's Wings.
And for Glennis, the most profound moment was being told, "You're free to go."
Right. She didn't need to stay. She didn't need to control the process. Her job was done, for now.
Glennis describes leaving that facility feeling like a war veteran. She was relieved, yet still experienced this deep sense of emotional loss, what she called phantom pain.
The emotional ache and presence as if Jacob was still right there, needy and hurting.
It was the physical and emotional cost of years of hypervigilance suddenly lifted, leaving this hollow space.
Marcus later confirmed that Jacob had signed all the necessary forms and agreed to stay until he is well. So Glennis's recovery had begun in earnest, defined by letting go and letting God in her continued codependency meetings.
Her support system, particularly Jack Smart, remained unwavering. He continued his silent acts of service, folding her laundry meticulously and leaving notes of biblical wisdom, including from Psalm 91, reminding her of refuge and trust.
These simple, consistent gestures were the opposite of the drama that had characterized her old life.
And this period became Glennis's radical personal transformation. She realized she had outsourced her entire identity to her husband and her son.
With the marriage ending and Jacob stabilized, she was forced to confront her own needs and desires.
She admitted she wanted to pursue creative interests, interior decorating and antiques, rather than returning to that dreaded substitute teaching job.
This was her finding a self that existed outside of the titles wife and mother of the addict.
This newfound independence culminated in a massive symbolic decision: buying a little house. It was painted the color of a dirty old sock and had a neglected yard.
A physical acknowledgement that her life wasn't and didn't need to be perfect anymore. She called it a heart decision and a God thing.
And the crucial architectural detail was the guest house in the back. This represented her continued hope for Jacob while establishing a physical, healthy boundary.
When he came home, he would have a place to live, but it would be separate. A defined space that Glennis would not control or enable in.
Meanwhile, the family dynamics continued to shift dramatically. Sarah, the ultimate advocate for tough love, finally offered an apology.
And why was that?
She discovered Geoffrey had lied about a business trip that was actually a cruise with Judith. Sarah finally accepted that Glennis was right about the marriage being deeply flawed long before Jacob's crisis.
And Glennis was able to face Geoffrey with this newfound strength when he served her the divorce papers. She refused to be the sensible woman who remained silent.
She pointed out his hypocrisy, telling him he was no better than Jacob, having lied to us, you cheated us, you stole from us, through his infidelity and abandonment.
She was demanding accountability, not just from Jacob, but from everyone who had contributed to the facade.
The ultimate moment of relief came in mid-January when Glennis attended Jacob's graduation from inpatient rehab. She saw a new man with clear eyes and a genuine smile.
Jacob secured a humble, honest start with a menial job at a janitorial service and moved back into Glennis's apartment for a time.
However, Glennis quickly learned that recovery is a daily decision, not a cure. When Jacob began showing subtle signs of slipping missing calls, vague answers, Glennis went straight back to Marcus, desperate to regain control.
And Marcus's final essential reminder was the last piece of the puzzle Glennis needed to accept. Her role is only to encourage, not to control.
He validated her worry, acknowledging that her continued deep concern for Jacob is simply the price a mother must pay for loving.
That worry will never completely leave, but Glennis had learned she could only control her own choices, her own identity, and her own path towards self-respect and stability. #tag outro.
Glennis's journey, it just maps the devastating collateral damage of addiction. It reveals how it forces loved ones into an agonizing choice between these deeply ingrained enabling habits and necessary, often agonizingly painful boundaries.
This central narrative arc is really Glennis's survival through self-discovery. She moved from clinging to the illusion of perfection, represented by the Range Rover and that smashed Waterford vase, to finding genuine stability and community in the unpretentious world of her small apartment and her new friends like Jack and Marcus.
The core insight for you, the listener, lies in Glennis's shift from trying to fix Jacob, that toxic codependent stance, to focusing on her own neglected identity.
Her decision to pursue her creative dreams and buy that forlorn house with the guest house wasn't just about real estate. It was about establishing her new self and enforcing a healthy physical boundary that protected her recovery first.
Glennis's story forces us to reflect on the nature of truth in our own lives. She eventually realized that the perfect life she'd tried so hard to protect was merely a cover-up, a destructive facade that really contributed to the family's breakdown.
So if facing devastating loss and chaos is the only possible path to tear down a destructive facade and discover your true, authentic self, you have to ask yourself, what illusions are you still holding on to simply to maintain an appearance of perfection?